every single person has some crazy thing that happened to them. Like, as soon as you go deep into their story, like, man, wow, I didn't know that. And it's like, how did you get out of that? How do some people get out of it and some people don't? Some people think, well, that person's different. They have more advantages. Look, that could be the case in certain ways, but most people that make it have had a lot of stuff go on in their life. They are just willing to not listen to those limitations anymore.
Hello, Lance. How are you today?
Hey, so good. So good. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm so excited to have you on the show today. It is awesome to have you here. You told me you're in Mexico. Are you visiting or are you living there at the moment?
I'm living in Tulum. Yeah, I've been here since New Year's Eve, and I'll be here till the end of April.
Oh, that is so cool. I love Tulum. It's such a fun place. My sister and I had a twinternational vacation there one time because we're identical twins, and I have so many fond memories there. Are you in the beach area or the town area?
I'm in La Valletta, which is, it's not beach, but it's not the town. It's like in the middle. It's kind of like where the expats sort of live and tourists kind of like, it's close enough to the town and it's about a half an hour bike ride to the beach.
Nice.
So it can be a little annoying getting to the beach, but once you're there, it's like, oh, I'm glad I did it. You know, it's like anything. So it's like, even though you know it's going to be great, there's always that resistance. It's like, do I want to go out there? But it's always amazing once I get there.
So worth the effort. You know, it's kind of like going to the gym. You're like, do I really want to? And then when you finally get there, you're like, I feel great. This was such a good option for the day.
Yeah. And I was thinking about that today, even before I went on a run. And I was like, why does that always happen? That we know the thing that's going to make us feel amazing. Once we do it, we know we'll feel great. But why do we question it before we do it? It's always like that. Huh? It's like everything that brings that good feelings or those good vibes after, it's like, oh, I don't want to do that right now. And it's so interesting.
Yeah, there must be some psychological resistance. Like that's natural. And I'm not really sure. I think about that. Like for me, waking up early is the thing. Like I resist waking up early, but when I do, I'm like, oh, this is something I need to do more often. And it still takes effort though. I'm telling you, it's like no matter how many times I have that reward in my brain for doing something that I resist, it's still hard to get over the hump sometimes.
Yeah. And it seems like the stuff that's easy never brings us that. So it's so interesting. It's like, oh, I'd rather do the easy thing, but then it doesn't bring that like good feeling later on. But it's always that thing that we don't really want to do that brings that fulfillment later. And I think most people face that, but it's interesting because like for me, I've just kind of learned to do my best to do those things that I know I don't want to do because I know I try and think about future me. Like what does future me want to feel like? You know,
Yes. So funny you bring that up because I have this alarm clock on my phone that's earlier than when I usually like to wake up. And the title is Future You Will Thank You.
Oh, it's so good. So important. Because like, isn't that really the point? It's like, don't we want like tomorrow, future you to be happy with what we chose now? It's like, even when you don't get up and don't make the bed, like, I don't need to make the bed. Who cares? But when you do, later on, you go to bed and you're like, oh, I'm so glad I made the bed. I'm so glad I did that.
Yes, you have to navigate with future you in mind always. And that's so hard to do. But I feel like once I get a little whiff of her, like I'm like, oh, future me exists. Then I'm much more motivated to put myself out there, do something I'm less comfortable with. And I feel like that kind of ties into what we're talking about today.
Totally.
In a way, which is facing adversity. I know that you're an expert in the adversity space. You've written a book called Mastering Adversity, which is pretty amazing. And you have your podcast called University of Adversity. When I think of what you and I were just talking about, I think about all the times I've gone through adversity, thinking and knowing to myself that there is a silver lining to this, or there will be lessons learned or wisdom to take from it. And I don't know if that's kind of your thoughts on adversity when you're going through it.
Yeah, it's kind of become that. never used to be that way.
Mm-hmm.
But as I've started to learn and go through a lot of different adversity in my life, as we all do, I started to learn that on the other side of that, like we were saying, there always brings some sort of fulfillment or joy or relief or growth. Like there's always something on the other side of it. And what I have learned to do, and it's not always easy, but when I'm in it, I just try to always remember that this is going to be what I'm going to talk about later. You know, like we want to have stories to tell people and add value to people's lives, right? That's the way I look at it, especially with the path that I chose. So this is going to be the thing that I can talk about later and relate to people with. So I do my very best to feel into the moments that are really challenging me and be like, okay, I got to figure this out, because if this is the path I chose, then I need to be able to understand the lesson here so that I can help somebody else later. And for me, that has become the way I sort of look at things, is that I can help somebody with this problem later. Like I become more valuable to the world and what I'm doing when I know how to solve problems or get through adversity, then I can help and give back later on. That wasn't what I planned to do. It was just, I started to learn that, wow, like going through this stuff really challenges me. But on the other side of it, I feel more love, more wisdom, more growth. And it's sort of just been this thing that's helped me level up. And what I've noticed is every time I level up to a different part of my life, then I'm met with the same resistance or the same adversity to test me to see if, you know, that's where I'm at, if that's true. So yeah, it's really interesting. And I found it's been a very important part of my life.
Mm-hmm. I think it's so beautiful how there's a point when you're going through adversity where you say to yourself, this is the thing I can use to connect with people. This is the thing that will help me teach others and guide others. And I remember thinking that to myself sometimes on a less conscious level than the way you articulated. But when I was really young, going through those moments and being like, this is going to be something that defines me. And I want it to be something that I take wisdom from and the ability to help others from, which is why I became an eating disorder recovery coach, right? So I remember feeling like I'm going through this and I know I'm going to use it to make the world a better place. And it sounds like that's exactly what you were thinking as you've gone through your adverse moments.
Yeah. Yeah. Like there's always been something in me that whenever I was working jobs that didn't feel fulfilling or doing things like I knew wasn't this thing, I always knew like I meant to do something that is fulfilling. So I got to figure out what that is. And for me, fulfillment comes from serving, helping people, and connecting with people. And what I found was that we can relate through stories. And, you know, through the podcast itself, I've been able to really understand a deeper level of the human experience, and that we all go through things, right? And we're all human. And for me, that has been one of these things that growing up, it's just helped me navigate this world and realizing that we're all very similar. We all have challenges. We're all facing things. And to be able to hear other people's stories about adversity and understand that you're not alone is really powerful. So yeah, it's been an interesting road. And I think that it's just been one of these things that sort of evolved into itself. And I didn't really ever plan on it happening like that. But as I've started to see the impact that it can make, it's kind of like, oh, okay, that brings me joy. Or that brings me fulfillment. Because when I was in a dark place, I needed inspiration. I needed to know that I wasn't alone and that there was a light at the end of the tunnel. And I think for any of your listeners listening out there, it's like sometimes we can feel like we're alone, like nobody understands us. And I've been there many times over. But I believe that things like this podcast and conversations like this allows people to get different perspectives and to realize like, oh, I'm actually not alone here. There's other people that have been through this. So it's like, okay, well, if they can do it, I can do it. And, that for me has been inspiring to be able to not only work on these things within my own life, but see other people do it as well.
Yeah, I think it's really amazing that you have conversations on the regular about a person's adverse life experiences. Like, this is what you want to dive deep into with people. And I'm sure you've learned so much about this from all of those conversations. And, one thing I want to bring it back to, which I'm curious about, because you mentioned some dark places that you've been through or been in. What adversity have you faced, and what did you make of that, and how did that impact your life?
When I was starting this transformational journey, I would say probably about 10 years, but not, the last 5 or 6 years is when I really began the excavating of the whole of understanding. I had to kind of look back at my timeline of like where things started to get squirrely in my life, from addictive behaviors and addictive patterns. And for me, I had to go back to childhood. And although I had a very loving family, there was a lot of fighting, a lot. And it was very emotional. My mom had anxiety. My dad wasn't the nicest guy, got stressed out. So as a young kid, I just was very anxious and very stressed. There was just a lot of heaviness and stress in the household. And after that, my parents split up, and a lot of divorce was very challenging. I moved across the country in Canada. So there's this place in Canada called Edmonton, Alberta. It's about a 12-hour drive. And I moved to Victoria. So my parents split up. And that was really tough on me at 11 years old, having to experience leaving my entire family. But what happened in that situation was the reason I'm going into this story is because a lot of this stuff really, I realized wow, that was a lot. I moved to this new place, and then I got bullied really bad. I went from being this cool kid, athlete, older brother, to move out with my dad across the country, no friends, no family, bullied, loser kid. And I didn't know how to handle it. And it was really hard. And it was I dreaded school. I sometimes think about, I can't believe I got through that. And then at the same time, my dad met a woman with 4 kids, which was a whole other stepmother from hell story. So there was all of this missing my family, getting bullied, and then this new crazy stepmom. So my teenage years were just I was a mess, an absolute mess. And I'm surprised that I'm here today to be able to talk about this, because I could have easily went down the other road and completely, and I did go up and down a lot. And so at the time, I was a teenager and I was playing hockey. I was a very good hockey player. That was my only outlet that could really help me get out of that heaviness. There was so much heaviness in my life. And sometimes I think back to young Lance, and I just it almost brings me to tears, because I don't know how I did it. I don't know how I was able to handle that. So then I had the hockey pressure, trying to make it professional. My dad was very hard on me on a lot of things. And I got really into drinking, really into escaping. I discovered alcohol, and it became this thing that allowed me to hide. It allowed me to create this new identity. I was oh, I feel really relaxed. I could be somebody else, and I get attention from it. And I can talk to girls, and I can be confident. And I was wow, this is really amazing. And alcohol started to do this thing, and mixing that in with trying to make it in sports, to try to become a professional hockey player, it didn't really mix. And my priorities got out of whack. So my hockey career ended up going down the toilet. And then I was stuck with who am I after sports? Who am I when I'm not an athlete? And I went through a really dark time. and a lot of drugs, addiction, alcohol, drugs, partying. Like, I'm so grateful to be alive today that I made it through that, because there's a lot of people that do a lot less that don't make it out. But that's where I kind of knew, like, okay, I'm meant to be here. I just don't know why. So I tried a lot of different things. I got into the bar and restaurant industry where I thrived and I did really well, but it was also very soul sucking. And although I did very well and it helped me do a lot of things in the world, I also knew that it wasn't for me. And I went very deep down the dark road of drug, alcohol, partying, and to the point where, like, I felt like my heart was going to explode sometimes. So I was really like a really, really dark place in 2016 in Australia, and I was living there. Then the next big thing happened where my younger brother committed suicide. He was 18. And then within a year and a bit, my dad got cancer and died instantly, like within days. So
Wow.
there was a lot of unpacking. There's a lot of stuff that went on, a lot of trauma, a lot of, you name it, right? There's all kinds of stuff there. So for me, trying to navigate childhood, teenage years, trying to be a pro athlete, trying to navigate that, life after sports, losing a brother, losing a dad, it was tough, right? It was tough. Even telling the story, because I feel like it was a different lifetime ago. And sometimes when I tell it, I'm like, this is insane. Like, how did that, like, so, and that sort of inspired me to change my life and start to listen to my heart more and start to create things that had meaning. And, that's kind of how this journey all started into the podcast and everything else. So.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm so sorry to hear about those losses. That sounds terrible, like a horrible experience. And I think the phrase that you said that sticks out to me the most is you started listening to your heart.
Yeah.
And it makes me sad that people sometimes have to go through something terrifying and heartbreaking and world shattering, earth shattering to finally start listening to their heart.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, how did you tap into your heart? Like, what was it saying to you in that moment?
Yeah, it's a great question. If I could think back to what really moved the needle the most was when I went completely sober in 2017. I gave up alcohol for the whole year, which led to me not wanting to work in the bars anymore because I was sober and I was like, I just don't want to do this anymore. So I started to go deep into personal development. I started to learn from Tony Robbins. I remember reading a book called Tools of the Titans, Tim Ferriss, all these people that had these great tools that could kind of just help you connect to yourself better, right? I started to pick up practicing gratitude, practicing journaling, practicing meditation, swapping poor habits for a better one. Minor changes. When I started to just change those habits, when I started to really go inward, even practicing gratitude to this day, like, I cannot stress it enough how much my reality in front of me changed when I focused on what I have versus what I don't have. And when I started to do these practices, I just started to feel different. And I started to be like, oh, this feels good. This is it. And that's when I started to realize my intuition is my heart, is my connection to God. And I didn't realize that at the time. And I came from a place where I grew up in a religious situation. I fought against religion. I didn't want anything to do with it. Now I've come around full circle and I've realized, okay, well, I personally believe God, believe intuition, heart, all of it is all connected to your heart. So I started to feel that the difference between the ego, who we think we are, and the soul, who we really are, the heart, right? And I just started to feel into the sensations of like what actually felt good and what actually didn't feel good. And I started to lean more into those feelings of excitement and joy and really trust that and less on what other people tell me or say I should do. And this is one thing that I can give myself credit for in my life, is that I've always really listened to the whisper, not always in the smartest decisions of choosing drugs and alcohol, but the big vision, the big picture of like choosing the thing that may not make sense to everybody, but it feels good to my heart. Like selling everything and moving to Australia. I've done it a couple of times to come to Mexico. There's some like crazy things that I've done, but they felt great to me because I knew they were from the heart. And even though it didn't make a lot of logical sense, I knew that, I trust this feeling. I trust this because it feels true. It's not like this weird projection of somebody else is having on me, right? And your truth is your heart. And I realized you're either living in truth or you're living out someone else's story or projection of what they think that is. And I've really had to figure out what is true to me, what is actually true, right? Like how many of us actually ask that question? Like, what is true to me? And this comes back to the heart, like opening your heart. Like when your heart is open and you feel joy and love, like that is the zone that I want to be in. So whatever makes me feel that, I've been in the darkness, I've been in the pain, and I've been in the shit that I don't want to feel. I don't want to be there. Like I want to do the things that bring me joy and love. And sometimes we have to alchemize that darkness into the light to realize it. But that's kind of been the thing. It's like figuring out what opens my heart, what keeps it open, and what allows me to actually feel like this is the right decision for me. And it's not always easy. It takes disconnecting from social media. It takes going inward. It takes doing breath work. It takes journaling. It takes disconnection from all the stuff around to really get clear inside. And that relationship to God, to source, whatever it is you believe in. And I believe that when you can get quiet and you can build that relationship, then you start to realize what's actually from your heart and what's not. So I feel like it's a journey that just keeps evolving. And that's for me, what's worked so far.
I'm really curious, just real quick, what are some of the things that keep your heart open that you've discovered?
Yeah, so it's a good question as well. Like I recommend people reading the book. I don't know, have you read The Untethered Soul?
I have not, no.
Okay. Michael Singer, The Untethered Soul is like amazing. It's doing things that bring you joy. I mean, it could be that simple, right? And I know that may sound cliche, and I would have laughed at myself saying that 5 years ago, 10 years ago, like, oh, shut up. Like, that's what it is. It's like, what brings you joy? Like, not temporary, like, dopamine hit, but like, what actually makes you feel alive? What actually makes you feel good, And for me, is honoring the things that are in alignment with my truth. And when I don't show up for myself, when I don't do the things that I say I'm going to do, I don't want to shame myself or feel bad, but I want to also look at, okay, I know that when I do these things, it doesn't make me feel that great. But I know when I do these things and make these choices, I feel great. So I'm going to make less choices on those things and choose more of these things because I know what it brings. And is it perfect? No. But like we said earlier about getting up early, like I'm the same. Every time I get up at 5:30, I'm like, my whole life is easier tonight. Everything is easier. I feel dialed in. I got my routine down. I feel ahead of the game. Why don't I do it every day? Why at 9 or 10 p.m. do I start to do things that are going to wreck my sleep, that I don't want to go to bed early? It's like, why is that? And like, when I realize the things like that, and I start to really do them and commit to them, I start to feel more joy and more happy. And it's kind of like, okay, you're in alignment. And figuring out how to do your best in this crazy world we're in right now to keep things in check that are in alignment to you, that feel good, do more of those things. And for me, it's like taking inventory of what those things are. What brings me joy? Like what actually makes me happy? Like if you want to turn on, Seinfeld and have a laugh or a comedy, like that's okay. That's great. Like you don't always have to be grinding and feel like you got to like hit your head against the wall. Like that's where I think a lot of people really don't understand is that it's like there's a lot of magic in the simple, joyful things that make you laugh, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I've learned. I'm like, we don't have to overthink this stuff. It's like, what do you love to do? Do you want to go outside for a walk? Great. That's going to make you feel better. Do it. Right? Please.
I completely agree with everything that you're saying here, but I can hear some listeners saying, what about practicality? What about paying the bills? What about all these things that I'm stuck doing? How am I supposed to follow my joy when I have 2 kids and a rough marriage and, all these things happening in my life? How do those people start to listen to their joy and live freely in the way that you've been able to do?
Well, I'm going to say, and that's great because this isn't my default. Like, it's not like, I come from a very scarcity, negative background in my family. I don't want to say that as a bad thing, but it is what it is. So I've listened my whole life to hearing, oh, that's not, when I go visit my mom, it's always that's not practice. That's not going to this and that, she's gotten better with it. But that is what I have been hearing my whole life. And I have decided that, okay, that may be true, but that doesn't work for me anymore. So I want to choose the other thing and listen to the people that aren't going through that. And so here's what I would say. I would say things aren't going to happen overnight, right? There's obviously commitments and life is hard sometimes. It really is. But at the end of the day, I believe that if you can choose 1 or 2 things that you can do daily that, first of all, understand what it is you want. You have to know what it is you want. And then you have to understand, well, what are the things that I can do to do that thing every day? Like, if you want to change, you at least have to have an idea of where you want to go. And then you have to kind of reverse engineer it and say, well, what one step can I take, even though I'm busy, even though I got stress, to go cast the vote into that direction, into that place.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody has different commitments and stress and things going on. So it's about having self-awareness on where you're at and then controlling what you can control, right? You can't control a lot of the things going on, but you can control the behaviors, right? You can control, what time you get up, what you watch, what you eat, who you associate with, like what you consume in all these different areas. It's not just about what you eat. It's like, whose information are you taking in? What are you watching at night? Like sometimes it's about getting rid of some stuff versus adding more stuff in. And I don't have all the answers. For me, I only know what works for me. And for me, it's just breaking it down, simplifying it to, okay, what is the simplest habits that I can take daily that are going to get me toward that? And that's it. And eventually focusing on those habits will start to slowly change the direction. But a lot of people won't even take the first step. They'll get overwhelmed by the amount of how long things take or the stories of other people about this doesn't work, I have this and I have that. There's so much energy put into why it won't work, why it doesn't work, versus maybe it will. Maybe it will. Have I tried it? Have I decided to maybe try it to do different things? And like I said, it's not going to happen overnight, but it just comes down to choices. Control what you can control and let go of what you can't. That's what I've had to tell myself time after time after time. When I feel overwhelmed or I feel things aren't working out, I just have to break it down to the basic. Okay, that's it. What can I control right now? What can I do? What can I do right this second? Oh, well, maybe I can drink some water. Maybe I'm dehydrated. Like, it could make me feel a little bit better. Maybe I can go for a run. Like, what is something that I can do this second to change how I'm feeling in the moment? And that's different for everybody, right? That's what I would say.
Yeah.
It's not easy, but it's also not overly complicated if you just break it down into simple steps.
So you've had over 400 podcast episodes on this topic. So I assume you've spoken to at least 400 people or more on adversity. And, we kind of mentioned that there's different ways you can face your challenges. You can focus on what's working and what you can change and what's in your control, or you just don't do that, right? And so what would you say is the main difference between, all the people you've talked to, the people who turn their adversity into power versus the people who don't? What would you say are the main differences between those two groups of people?
The difference between the people that kind of turn adversity into opportunity, let's say, are the people that just believe in opportunity more than not. That's it. And they believe in empowerment versus disempowerment, right? They believe in the victor versus the victim. Real simple stuff. It's hard sometimes, but these people aren't any different. They have just been willing to trust themselves enough and to believe in themselves enough and to be okay with failing over and over and over and over until they find something that works. And that is the difference. Every single person has some crazy thing that happened to them. Like, as soon as you go deep into their story, like, man, wow, I didn't know that. And it's like, how did you get out of that? How do some people get out of it and some people don't? And I think there's this thought that some people think, well, that person's different. They have more advantages. Look, that could be the case in certain ways, but most people that make it have had a lot of stuff go on in their life. And they're just willing to not listen to those limitations anymore. And that's what I think the difference is. You get tired of that and you just choose the other option.
It's so hard, I think, to sometimes be in a place to make that choice when you've gone through one traumatic experience after the next. Like, how did you not let the trauma of losing your brother and your dad so quickly and all of the things that you've been through, how did you not let that bring you down to a place where you couldn't be resilient anymore, or you didn't have it in you? What do you think got you through that and brought you to that place of mastering adversity?
My understanding of the habits of what am I able to use to move through the difficult stuff. So that could be exercise, that could be meditation, that could be journaling, that could be praying, that could be cold plunge, it could be sauna, it could be eating healthy. There's a lot of things. And I just focused on the tools that I knew and read books about people that had been through things. To be honest, like, the podcast was like therapy for me, right? Like 5 years of talking to people, like, it transformed my life beyond belief because I was learning, but I was also getting so many perspectives. So I focused really on what I knew at the time to move through stuff. There's still stuff that I work through now, like stuff that's rooted more, like, believe it or not, like losing my brother and dad were hard, but they're not the ones that traumatized me the most. The reason I went and told you back in the first part of my story was like leaving my mom and getting bullied was like really tough. And what I learn more about trauma now is understanding that sometimes it's not the big events. Like, trauma, it's like that emotion, it's like that energy that gets stuck, that stress cycle that doesn't get to complete itself. And depending on the support system you have with you, the resources, things can get really jammed up.
Yeah.
And you don't have anyone to go to. And then all of a sudden you're picking up coping mechanisms, right? To compensate, to just wanting to feel better in the moment. So I've realized that a lot of what stems from me was like those moments, those years. And that's stuff that I still have to go and visit and work through about, like, working on stuff like my mother wound and stuff like that, about almost needing women to be the mother figure in my life, which I had to work through. which is really interesting. And a lot of men, they didn't have that growing up, so they want like their mom and partner. And I realized, I was like, wow, I didn't have that growing up, so I was trying to seek that. So it's really interesting figuring that out. So when I'm going through stuff, as I always am, we all are, I just focus on what tool do I have in my tool belt? When I'm feeling low frequency, low down, how can I sit with it and feel it, acknowledge it, but not get stuck in it? Allow it to feel, allow it to be heard, not medicate myself with alcohol and drugs and whatever else, and really trust the feeling, but not allow myself to just become that, just to hear it, feel it, and then do something that's going to make me feel better. That's really been it.
Well, I feel like you've been even helpful for me just to remind me of how useful the small daily actions really are, right? And I'm really looking forward to looking at my day and thinking about what are some of the small things I can bring back in to help me feel better when I wake up in the morning, to help me feel more alive and more excited. So thank you so much for reminding me about those small changes having such a huge impact on your mental transformation. My one question for you before I let you go today, what wisdom do you have to share or advice do you have for folks who are currently going through something really difficult?
If you are currently going through something difficult, just keep going, because you will get out of it. You will learn from it. You will grow from it. And you may not see it now, but you will be grateful for it, because it'll help shape who you become. And you'll be able to hopefully help somebody else that may be going through the same thing. So if you're in it, I like to say, if you're in the shit, just keep going. Trust, it's all going to work out eventually. And again, focus on what you can control, let go of what you can't, and just keep going and trust that it'll all work out.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. It's like we came full circle, bringing it back to that idea of being able to use that adversity to help others one day and just getting through it so that your future self can evolve into someone greater. So thank you so much, Lance, for joining me today. I know the listeners are going to have so much to take away from this episode, and I really appreciate your vulnerability and sharing your story and all of the lessons that you were able to take away from that today.
Oh, Meg, thank you so much. This was great. And yeah, I hope everybody enjoyed it. It's important to go deep and share. And yeah, it was an absolute pleasure.
Awesome. All right. Well, take care, Lance.
Thanks so much.